My name is Joe Woodham from Torii. Welcome to our vlog series, All Things Design. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Dineth Mapa, Director of Product Design for AirWallex's. Dineth comes with over a decade of experience leading design roadmaps for companies like Airbnb, Xero, and currently AirWallex's, where he's building high-impact design teams across places like San Francisco, Australia, and Asia. Dineth, it's a pleasure speaking to you. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. Lovely to meet you.
You too. Well, let's just jump straight into it. You've worked with some pretty amazing companies. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as with most designers, I never really kind of woke up and thought I was going to be a product designer. My dream was always to design cars growing up, and I thought I could pursue that journey. So I went to Monash Uni for industrial design and mechanical engineering, and kind of engineering was really, really tough, and I really struggled through it. I just kind of fell over the line. And even with industrial design, I found myself not being a very good car designer. And there was no way I was going to get a job at like Holden or Ford, which is what I thought was going to happen. You know, it's ironic now that because both those companies are close. But you know, what I actually is actually really interesting because I should have done more research before I thought this would be a good career, because what I actually realized was that when you become an automotive designer, you don't get to design any like sports cars or anything. You get to work on a mirror for like 20 years, you know. It's usually like, you know, the really stylish Italian guys in Italy that designs like the fancy cars. And so, you know, I wasn't good at it anyway. So I kind of, you know, finished my time, just ended up doing like furniture design. And then, you know, I graduated in the middle of the GFC, so 2008, didn't have any jobs, prospects or anything like that. And I remember like sending like 300 maybe like resumes out to like 300 different like job applications, but sometimes you'd be excited to get like a rejection notice because, you know, because like at least they saw you. Like sometimes you wonder, I wonder if they got it, but if they rejected you. So that was kind of, you know, where I kind of started, and I was kind of working in like, you know, selling insurance was my kind of like, you know, job after uni. But I kept applying, and I ended up getting a job at this company called Tiny Me, or used to be called Gyrus, which kind of does customized and personalized kind of kids products. And both the founders there were industrial designers, so we had kind of a bit of a connection. And I was there for a couple of years, and I got to do a bit of everything from web design to sourcing products from China and all sorts of different things. And I was there for 3 years, and then my wife, now but girlfriend at the time, was kind of studying for her CA exam, and I was just kind of thought I'd look for some jobs on Seek, as you do then. And this random company called Xero came up, and I, you know, asked my wife, "Hey, have you heard of these Xero people?" She's an accountant. I said, "Hey, do you know these Xero people?" And she basically said, "Yeah, we use some of these people for some of our clients." And I thought, "Oh, interesting. I don't know anything about finance, but I'll apply and see what happens." And I applied and didn't expect to hear back at all. And then a couple of weeks went by, and Philip, the head of design at Xero, reached out, and I had a quick chat with them. And something that really stood out for me during that interview was I was like talking for about 10 minutes, and I realized, what am I doing? Like, I don't know anything about finance. And I remember going to Phil, I feel like I don't think I'm the right person. I don't know anything about finance. Like, how do I know what to design for small business? And what the thing he said was that, you know, like most people who use small business software are people like you. They're not experts in finance. They're not experts in accounting. So it's really important that, you know, you think like a business person and not so much like a technical or accountant or a lawyer or anyone that actually does the detail side of the technical side of businesses. So that really stood by me. And, you know, I was the first designer that they hired in Australia, and the product team at Xero in 2013 was like 2 people, which is myself and a PM. And we're in this bunker in Hawthorne. I
remember, still there.
Yeah, that's right. So, and then since then we kind of grew, and, you know, we grew massively, and, you know, obviously the cloud took off. And funny talking about the cloud, because when we kind of really started in Australia, Xero, people were like freaked out about the cloud. You know, it wasn't like, do we trust the cloud? And if you think about life today, like everything we consume is on the cloud. But back then, I think like some of the competitors were like shipping DVDs, right? That was like the point of difference. And because you go to Officeworks, you get your DVD, and, you know, you download your accounting software, and that was like what you do for the year. But But another funny story I remember being at Xero, I remember reading a paper and they were asking, like, quizzing Australians on what they thought about the cloud. And like 30% of people said they don't find the cloud to be reliable because they're worried what impact the weather might have on it. So, so I think my point is, like, we've come a long way since like 2013, and it was super exciting to be in that journey of Xero, going from like 0 to 100. And I was lucky enough to do that in Melbourne, and then I was lucky enough to do that all over again in San Francisco. So my wife and I and Stuart McLeod and Ollie, we moved to San Francisco to do the same thing that we did in Melbourne, to hire a product team and grow that North American kind of business. And again, we went from like 2-3 people to about 200 by the time I was kind of about to come back to Australia about 2 years later. And I was about to come back, and this other up and coming company called Airbnb reached out, and I thought, how hard could travel be? And I thought I'll give that a go. And then I joined them, and it was a really exciting time again. Like, even though they were, fairly established company, Airbnb, the problems that they had then was just getting bookings. And then when I left, as the business grew, it became like you have a lot of customers using the platform, but with that comes more growing pains as well. And the teams that I ended up leading at Airbnb was anti-discrimination, in-home accessibility, and city regulations. 3 teams that no one even dreamt of having in 2014 when you just had a small home sharing business. But sometimes when a business grows, you get like other things that happen on a platform, and these teams kind of came about because of that. But lots of great kind of learnings during my time at Airbnb, and then I eventually moved back home and joined AirWallex's to join that fintech train again.
Yep, it's some pretty exciting, I guess, companies to join. And it seems like you've managed to get there at the perfect time as they start to sort of rocket in their growth. Because I remember when Xero came into the market, and look at them now. They've taken over the office building at the back. They've purposely built the one in the front, and they're hiring like crazy. It's a great product. So is Airbnb, and so is AirWallex's. So obviously on that journey, you've been surrounded by growth the entire time. What inspired you to take that leap and move into leadership?
Yeah, I mean, leadership's not something that I kind of actively was looking for. I think, for me, I was never like, oh, I need to get into leadership to like climb the ladder of like design. I never really thought about that. For me, I always just found myself naturally kind of helping, guiding, and be curious about, well, how to like empower a team to do their best work. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean from just a design perspective. I mean like all the other functions that need support to build a good product. Like a product isn't necessarily, you can't have a good product with like just a good design team or a good engineering team or a good product team. You actually need, like at a bare minimum, all 3 of those functions to work really well to come up with a good product. And a lot of the skill is in like, how do you navigate those, I guess, the constraints and the push and pull of each of those functions to come up with a product in time that's, above a certain standard. And so for me, it's very much, building partnerships with the PMs, building connections with engineers, even with designers. Like certain designers will have different skill sets, and how do you partner with them to get the best out of a certain flow or a product or an experience. So I just felt myself naturally being gravitating towards that coordination side. And I think that's a really important part of design leadership in many ways, because if you just move design out of that sentence for a moment, you're just a leader, and you're a leader that's really helping coordinate things and supporting and servicing in many ways. I see my job as a service person to help that product team do their best work. And yeah, like I guess at my core, I'm a designer, and that's my special skill. But I think overall, I'm a generalist who help the team do their best work.
Very cool. You obviously, in our conversation before we jumped on this, we're talking about understanding the business aspect to what you're doing. Do you think your nature or interest in understanding the business has helped you on that leadership journey?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really important to, as we talked about our chat earlier, I think like understanding business is really, really important for a designer, because the business is also in many ways a persona or a user that you need to solve for in many ways, right? Because you've got the end person that's you're offering a service or a product to, and you got to service their needs or their problems, or the jobs that they might need to do, for example. But I think the business is also a interesting stakeholder as well. And I can give you an interesting analogy from a team that I was leading at Airbnb, and that was a city regulation team. When we first started, all we had to really solve for was either the guest side or the host side of the experience of Airbnb. But as we got bigger, we had to solve for the guest side, the host side, often city officials who were really monitoring how quickly Airbnb was growing. You had to solve for the communities that Airbnb was part of. Airbnb was in 55,000 different cities, and they all had different needs and issues and challenges. And so that was almost like a use case. But we also had Airbnb as a business. So we're a business trying to, go public, and we obviously had, targets and numbers to hit. So we had to make sure that make sure that was being thought about as well. And the challenge as a designer or as a product person often those are competing kind of needs, and how do you kind of, get the best out of them and hit that fine line where you're, servicing all their requirements, and do it in a way where, generally everyone's going to be happy. And that's always the challenge as a designer, like thinking about the business needs, the customer's needs, or the needs of any other kind of people that you might be solving for.
It's an interesting challenge when you're in a high growth business. How do you make sure you're focusing on the right thing that's going to get you to that next stage?
100%. And even it's no different in as a Xero or an AirWallex's as well, because we say small business. A small business could be just one person, mom and dad type business. Small business can be like 30, 40 people, business as well. So, and the use cases are very different, and a business with 100 people will have, layers of management and different people to do certain things, where a small business of one person, you wear all those hats, and, and they have different needs. They might not have the time to invest in your product. So how do you make sure that your product works for that one business example, and also, 100 business example? And that's often where the design challenge is.
Yep, definitely. Well, look, as you've sort of progressed into that design leadership role, is there any, one piece of advice that stood out to help shape you as a leader?
It's a really good question. One piece of advice. I think one thing that always stands out for me is I always thought, I was looked at great leaders, and I thought these people just was born with this, and they knew everything from the moment that they started walking, and what I really realized over time is that no one really knows what they're doing. They're just figuring it out on the fly. I think it's less about knowing everything. It's just more around just rolling up your sleeves and just doing it. I think that's probably the advice that I've been given and the things that I've seen. And I guess the advice point is no one really knows what they're doing. You just kind of show up and, do the best you can for you, your team, your company, your team, or whatever that needs done. You're just as I said at the start, you're a service person. You're really helping the team do their best work. And often it's just not about talking about it, by just doing it.
Yeah. I agree. Well, this probably leads on to the next question. Bringing designers into your teams and going on that journey, what have you always looked for, or what are the attributes that you think make a great designer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I used to think, early in my career, the best designers are the people that had the best Figma files or sketch files, or just had the best visual design, or if you're a dribble designer, you have the ultimate really pixel perfect thing. Over my time, I realized that none of that really matters all that much. There's certain things you can learn, like how to use a new design software, or learn how to be a good visual designer, or learn how to understand research. Those are skill sets you can learn, but things that are really, really hard to learn, is things just being open and willing to learn, and flexibility of being able to especially in a startup, flexibility is really important for a designer, because you might be working on lots of different things, wear many different hats, and being able to adapt as a designer. And I think above all, though, the most important thing is just having a good attitude is probably the most important thing. And it's not something you can just kind of learn, to have a good attitude. So the best designers I've worked with are people who just show up to work and might as a team, you could have a good day and a bad day, but they're always going to show up. They're always going to have a good attitude, and they're always going to be like, well, let's get this done, and rather than complain, and like they come up with solutions rather than problems. And they're usually the best kind of designers that I've worked with, because they're the ones that help move a product team forward from a design sense.
Okay, so look, for anyone that's kind of looking to develop as a designer, would you say really focus on that, I guess, positivity, and be willing to, I guess, throw your hat in the ring and get involved in anything and everything?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I always like worry when I say positivity. Like I don't think like it's good to be positive, but you don't want people to be like fake positive either, right? Like you want them to be optimistic, but not like, oh yeah, everything's fine. That meme with the dog and everything's being on fire. Like you don't want that either, right? But what you want is people who will speak up. They care. People who care is probably really, really important. That's an important skill. But I guess people who can contribute, care about what you're doing, and generally optimistic are the people who I think thrive in a good design team.
Yeah. Okay, so like your first job at Xero 2013, I think you mentioned, a lot's changed in the design space. Is there anything that you've seen more recently that's emerging that you're quite excited about?
For me, I guess I'm going to be a little bit biased, because I guess I'm in that fintech world, so it's what I probably immerse myself. So I could be wrong when I say this, but I think fintech is really, really exciting, because I know that like you've got the whole decentralized finance world, and you've got like Web3 and crypto, and you've got a whole that world. Like if you put that aside for a moment, like if you just think about pure like simple things like payments, like that technology has like that whole concept of payments hasn't changed for like hundreds of years. It's like when we think about like some of the biggest institutions in the world, you think about like HSBC, you think of like JP Morgan, Citibank, like these are like global companies, but they all still do business the same way they would have done business 100 years ago. They've got like, this big, building in the middle of the city, and like, and that's where you go and you open a bank account with them, and you form a relationship with a banker. And, a lot of business is still done that way. And, I think over the last 10 years, that's changing. And I think it's changing even more. But if we think about our life outside of the finance world, like everything we do is online on our phones. We just send things. It's just basically money today for me is I think is data. You're just sending things back and forth, and cash is a bit old school, right? And
Depends
so
where
like,
you live.
yeah, I kind of
Indonesia, so cash is I live in Indonesia, so cash is everything here.
Well, it's so funny you say that. It's so many parts of the world. It's still the way of the world, right? You still like have these pieces of paper or these pieces of metal that you exchange for goods and services, like, and we maybe are a bit comfortable living in cities like Melbourne, Sydney, like San Francisco, New York, where there's like you've got these apps now, you can got these like most banking apps, and we've gotten so used to that. But there is large part of the world that still doesn't have that, and I think there's such an opportunity to in both ways. One is getting the rest of the world like off actual cash and moving into that whole world of data, because a lot of people do now have like phones and the access to internet. I think it's just so exciting to be able to like bring businesses in, connect businesses through technology, and payments and finance is just one small part of that. But I think at the start of the conversation we talked about like what's trending and what's really cool. I find that like connecting businesses with the rest of the world is a really exciting part, and that's one of the reasons why I took this role at AirWallex's.
Yeah, I was going to show you. I've got an AirWallex's card. I use it as my bank. It's far superior, right? It's cheaper, it's easier, and it just makes sense. So I'm a massive advocate of what's happening in the fintech space. I'm excited to see where we end up, because I think we're only kind of just scratching the surface, right? But banks are very, I guess, old and outdated from a degree of what they do. When you've got a product like AirWallex's, kind of changes the game, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think and one of the really interesting things is that I think a lot of companies now, including AirWallex's, is thinking global first instead of local. Like if you think about the 4 Australian banks, like the big 4 Australian banks, they were all started locally and then expanded out by connecting banking relationships with like other countries' banks, and then those relationships is what costs you money when you try and send money in many ways, right? Because everyone wants to get their cut in many ways. Whereas if you think globally from day one, it gives you a clean slate and it gives you a infrastructure that's pretty clean. And for us, it's very much thinking about, at least at AirWallex, we're thinking about it as a financial platform or financial operating system, where people can, connect their businesses on, and you can, depends if you want to do businesses in Europe or Asia or Australia, it doesn't really matter, because it's not something that's already baked into everything that we do. It's not really an afterthought, right? So I think that's where the excitement is as we become more and more of a globalized world.
Yeah. See what happens with Web3, right?
Right.
There's so many exciting things that are happening across technology, and just this the financial system or these payments are just the start, right? So let's see what happens. But Dineth, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Obviously, you're always hiring at AirWallex's. If anyone wants to reach out, any questions, or want to come work at an exciting company like AirWallex's, what's the best way of connecting with you? Definitely just message me on LinkedIn. I always reply. At the start, I said, I got 300 rejections when I first looked for a job. So I actually, that's stayed with me for a long time. So I always reply to anyone who reaches out to me. I always reply. So, please reach out if you are looking for a design gig or a product gig or engineering gig for that matter. I'm more than happy to chat. No pressure, just to say hi if nothing else. And thanks for that, Joe. I really appreciate the chat, and thanks for making time for me. Once again, a pleasure. Thanks for jumping on.